This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. And today we're going to be diving into one of my absolute favorite topics. I can already hear you rolling your eyes in the audience. It's all about AI and the future of the HR or people function, given all of that innovation. And well, you all know I find it absolutely fascinating and so important to us as we start thinking about the shape of the function and the impact that it's going to have on the businesses that we enable. But you may not know my guest, Albert Loyola. He is an absolute expert in this field. He's done a bunch of research, which I hope he's going to tell us about today. There'll be trouble if he doesn't, but he is absolutely the guy to be jumping into this with. And I think has done a lot of much more systemic thinking than others who I think do tend towards that reactive. Anyway, I think I'm doing a bit of a spoiler here. Albert, welcome to the show.
Hi, Felix, Albert Loyola based out of Dallas. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I look forward for our conversation.
Absolutely. Well, look, for our listeners today who've tuned in, could you just give us a bit of a background to yourself and sort of why you're so interested in this topic?
Yes, absolutely. Albert Loyola based out of Dallas. I've been in management consulting for the last 13 years. My areas of expertise are workforce transformation and human and talent strategy powered by talent, technology, and data. And I started this journey maybe 14 years ago, and I worked closely with many data scientists back at the time. The data scientist was kind of like something new, and I was working in oil and gas. And these data scientists were trying to predict efficiency when it comes to drilling operations. So then I thought, why don't we use those analytics and that perspective when it comes to AI for human capital? And that's where I got into immerse myself into AI, data analytics, data strategy, and so on, and move into the AI space when it comes to human capital. Then started my journey in consulting and had the opportunity to work with the C-suite, HR, and business leaders to plan, design, and execute transformational programs powered by talent, technology, and that in a nutshell, my experience.
Yeah, and I think that coming from outside of maybe the professional HR space must give you a really interesting insight. Now that you've been in it for a while, coming in it more at the sort of data science, sort of behavioral perspective, do you think that maybe that more scientific approach has given you an interesting perspective on some of the challenges we're encountering today?
I think at the end of the day is how you as an HR professional help your CHRO and the C-suite to connect talent to business value. And in order to do that, you need to be able to be proficient when it comes to technology. And with that in mind, be able to use talent data to produce insights so that you can tie those talent insights to enable business initiatives. Right? So when you are able to connect that talent value proposition powered by technology, data, and AI, then you can help your C-suite to make decisions around, for example, M&A, acquisitions, market expansion, product development, sales, and so on.
And I think that one of the really exciting elements that defines data availability in the sort of HR and people space is that it feels like if you've been in this space for 14 years, I'd imagine you've seen quite a transition from the sort of data that was available in the people HR space when you started to the data that's available now, which feels much richer and much more much easier to access, to then turn into those sorts of insights that you can provide the company leadership with.
Yes. So back in the time, what we call now AI and agentic AI, back in the time was called big data, right? And what we have seen in the last 10 years is how AI has been democratized in the market to a point where now, if you're a small HR technology vendor, you can able to use those large language models to tailor something to address a specific use case across the time value chain.
That's why we're seeing this explosion in software, I suppose, at the moment, like really powerful software.
Exactly. Definitely. This the democratization of that capability so that you can enable talent through this technology to inform business decisions.
That's really key, I think. And I'd love to move on to this next step. I know you've done a lot of thinking around what this sort of democratization of AI means for the HR function. What's the big picture that a lot of people are missing? What are the how is this new wave of technology going to change the function and the relationship that we have with the businesses we support?
So I'm going to take one step back to make sure our audience understand, where are we going with AI and how are you able to create a compelling use case to get the buy-in from the C-suite so that you can start moving from strategy to deployment. One of the key components that I've seen working with clients is that sometimes people think that AI is something that you plug and play, meaning that you find a solution in the market and you think that that solution is going to help you to solve multiple use cases across the time lifecycle. And the truth is, because AI is constantly evolving, and you have multiple HR ecosystems or solutions in your tech stack, that create complexity, right? So where I'm going with this is that before you start thinking about which is the platform you're going to use, your AI journey needs to define as one of the first steps is how our data is ready. Build a data foundation. Because to bring the value of AI for your organization, that data needs to be trained and tailor-made based on your employee and enterprise information. So if the information is biased, for example, then the outcomes are going to be biased as well. So that's number one, right? Is just build a data governance, data foundation before you start thinking about scalability or different. Number two is you need to allow your organization to experiment. So before you define a strategy, think about what are those use cases that you want to enable. But in order to enable those use cases, you need to allow your people to understand how are they currently using that technology in their day-to-day work. Because that will allow you to understand here's the potential gaps that we have and then plan for it. Number two is as you are thinking about that, then how can we learn quickly and deliver value? And what I mean by that is after I experiment and I have a baseline when it comes to potential gaps and opportunities and how can I tackle this, then which is the use case that I want to use to test the waters, to run the pilot, learn from those mistakes and expand.
Before you move on from that last one, I think it's one of these fascinating points where I think that culturally HR are not amazingly set up to deal with this. I think there are so many, in my experience, I'd be curious to see if you found the same. Generally speaking, HR is amazingly well placed to deliver large scale change programs, amazingly well placed to limit risk and to make sure that an organization is compliant. In most people functions, most HR functions, there isn't that product mindset where it's okay to experiment and fail, experiment and roll out. experiment and reset and iterate and move very quickly. And I wonder whether you think that there's a piece of cultural shift that's required in the HR space to enable that sort of experimentation that you rightly say, that you say that's that big third step. Do you think there's a cultural shift required from your experience?
I think there are different components to address that. One of them is, to your point, is a culture of innovation and make people comfortable experimenting, testing, and leading with AI. Another component is around how can we start thinking about our workforce? What's the plan for the workforce as we move from strategy to implementation? What are the skills that they need? Proficiencies? What are the new learning pathways? And with that in mind, start thinking about how we're going to build, buy, and borrow our path. So multiple ways how you can address this. Definitely the culture component is huge, but also you need to think about how you're going to operate, number one. Number two, what are the processes that you need to put in place? Number three, what kind of data? We just talk about it. And number four, change and adoption to make people safe when it comes to AI.
So a lot of complexity, a lot of change. It can feel overwhelming often. What would you say is, so you mentioned getting data in place as step one. What are the first sort of, I'm a big believer in just putting one foot in front of the other. What are the first for HR leaders that are early in this journey? What would you say they can do this week that would set things rolling in the right direction?
I think one of the activities that you can tackle is ask your people, ask your workforce, like, hey, we are planning to use AI. Put together a survey and just trying to understand how they are currently using it at work and at home. And keep in mind that people work remotely, right? So just be able to use that information to inform what you're planning to do in the next 6 months, a year or so. And now even you have that employee listening technology not only gather the data, but we are right to a point where the system can also sense emotion, the way how people react to comments, and give you additional information for you to activate specific initiatives. So that would be my first recommendation. Just spend quite some time to understand how are they currently using that information and AI.
Yes. So I think that's really useful. Let's talk about the HR function as in the shape of it, because I know you've done some thinking about maybe roles that don't exist, just sort of jobs that don't exist within the HR function at the moment, or a pretty few and far between that you think are going to be a bit of a facet of the future. So as we're starting to think about building our teams to be ready for the world of widespread AI adoption, what are the sorts of people we should be thinking about bringing into our teams to help us on that journey?
I think because AI is changing every component at the enterprise and at the workforce level that involves culture and processes, the HR function needs to change. And what I mean by that is not only roles. Bigger picture is what's going to be your new operating model to serve your organization. How are you going to create those new services, make it more agile, maybe more intuitive, powered by AI? But then, which are the talent practices that you need to put in place to enable this customer experience hyper personalization, right? So with that in mind, there are a lot of things to consider. And I think it's around how are we going to be able to define the specific use cases that we want to focus on for HR. And based on those use cases, how do I organize my HR function? To answer your question then, which are those roles that I need in order to address that? One of the things that I see working with clients across multiple industry verticals is that Number one, I've seen a shift in the HR, the CHRO role, right? Be the one that is going to connect with the business, is very proficient when it comes to AI. I've met many CHROs that understand not only that, but also are able to advise and very familiar with the capabilities. But that's going to be a key role to build trust and credibility across the enterprise and get the sponsorship. Number two is many organizations realize that they need to have a business consulting function within HR to help to move from strategy to execution. The reason why is because, and I don't want to play consultants, but consultants they are familiar with that kind of work. Like they understand very well how to define strategy, value case, roadmap, and then be able to help the business to translate that big picture into an executional plan. And I've seen that many organizations implemented this internal HR consulting in order to quickly move these AI initiatives.
Wow, that's fascinating. So they're bringing people in from, you sort of management consultancies or with that project management change mindset, and they're actually sitting within the HR function to drive, well, I suppose to understand the strategy and then drive the change. So it's almost, yeah. So they're bringing people in, because you'd often see those sorts of people within, a change function or a transformation function. It's fascinating that's going to be in the future of an HR function as well.
Because it's going to be project based, right? Very similar to how professional firms operate. It's their main capability is talent, and talent is the one that drives value. This is exactly the same how HR is evolving, because you're going to have AI, and AI is something relatively new to HR. So you can bring those consultants to help you to accelerate, the execution. The second role that I've seen with working with clients is having a team of data scientists to manage talent data, but also at the same time be able to provide the foundational components end-to-end data strategy to provide analytics and people insights. So that's something that caught my attention. I've seen that a couple of years back, where they are building a team of data scientists to be able to provide that information to make business decisions more informal.
I suppose that feels to me, and this may be the case. That feels like, and I'm just thinking about the majority of people listening will probably be from smaller organizations and thinking, but man, I'd love a data scientist, but there's no way I'm going to be able to pick them up in my team. But just speaking at aloud, I think having someone that, even at a relatively modest size HR team, having someone that really knows how to manipulate data and pull the insights from it feels like a bit of a no-brainer when you're talking it aloud, because it tends to be one of those skill sets within the HR function that is lacking. So why not bring in a specialist rather than trying to figure it out yourself?
Definitely. Obviously, to your point, bringing data scientists involved that your HR function has certain level of maturity and capabilities. If you're a smaller organization, what you could do is, instead of just building that team from the ground up, you can outsource it. There are companies that can provide those services, or you can find that technology platform. It's not going to be perfect, but at least it can help you to create those insights that you want, right? So there are options depending on the company size that we're talking about, even the industry. The bigger you are, the more complex the problems are, but also you have access to multiple resources funding us.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's I think that's absolutely bang on. I think I'm gonna pull you up on something I saw, or that's something that we spoke about previously, which is the increasing need of HR to really understand the compliance challenges of artificial intelligence. Do you see that as a big part of the future?
Yeah, that's a great topic. And I feel like sometimes it's not, the market doesn't give enough attention. But I think, to my previous point where we talk about the data foundation, the data governance to make predictions and reduce bias, Another component to think about, and this is a new role that I've seen growing exponentially within HR and data, is the HR compliance man, right? Someone that is going to make sure that whatever tool or application that we're using to enable talent is meeting the specific standards from the market legally and be able to make sure that we put guardrails so that we don't create any challenges for the organization and expose our employee data.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and it feels very different to the kind of compliance that HR's used to. It feels like being able to get under the skin of a new people ops software package or sort of way of working to make sure that it's not making decisions, the way that decisions are being supported in different jurisdictions, in New York State, for example, versus Alabama, to make sure that the way that the software is compliant actually feels very different to the classic compliance that you'd see in an HR function, looking at employment law and those sorts of things. It definitely, it feels pretty radically different to me. Am I overplaying this?
Yeah, I think you are spot on. That's the reason why when I'm involved in these kind of projects, one of the first steps is how prepared our organization is for AI and running a readiness assessment for HR, right? And then you focus, to your point, on compliance, be able to understand what are the specific policies and leading practices that we have now. And if so, will these practices be able to address what we're trying to bring to the organization? Right? So having a readiness assessment, be able to understand how ready the organization is for AI is a good starting point to define your AI journey.
Fantastic. Well, we're sort of coming a little bit to the end, but I wonder if we could take our focus away from the function itself and towards individual practitioners. I mean, as you'll know, at the time of recording, sort of coming to the end of 2024, there are sadly a lot of talent HR recruitment professionals that are out of work at the moment, and a lot of people looking at reskilling. If you were, and of course, a lot of people looking to join our wonderful profession, if you were to give them some advice in terms of like the best way to prepare themselves for a sort of future state of HR, what sort of advice would you give them in terms of things that they can study in their own time, areas that they can level up?
There are 5 things to share with the audience. Number one, don't be afraid to learn about data and AI. There are multiple courses that you can just go to a content provider and give you this foundational knowledge on data and AI. That will allow you to have a better understanding when you are part of these discussions with your C-suite or your HR teammates to start thinking about value creation and use case prioritization. Number two is tied to that is be familiar with people analytics and workforce planning. And I'm currently working with a client doing that because that will give you the entire view when it comes to how are you connecting business from the processes, that resource planning, and connecting that with multiple HR capability areas, all the way from talent acquisition to learning, mobility, and so on. So get familiar with people analytics. That will give you also a foundation in order to understand how can you use all this new technology across the talent lifecycle. Number three is around more around HR innovation. And what I mean by that is to start thinking about how can HR evolve based on different perspectives, feel comfortable and spending time reviewing those POV because most likely your HR function is going to start evolving in the next 2, 3 years. So how I'm going to be able to connect operating models, service delivery, what are the leading practices in the market, How can I connect those leading practices to be able to provide insights and so on? And the last but not least is one of my favorites. It's get familiar with HR technology, right? There are more than 40,000 plus vendors out there in the market. And every time you talk to them, they will tell you my solution will solve the problem. There are different kind of technology players. Each of them have their own value proposition. And most of them are building agents, right? Even all the way from the HCM systems that realize the opportunity to design and deploy these agents based on specific use cases, all the way to the small ones that are already leading the market and bringing value. So don't be afraid to get familiar with those vendors and their capabilities, because that will give you a solid ground when you are rolling your sleeve to do your actual work for your organization.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And anyone looking for a good resource there, sign up to my Talent Bites newsletter, which is all around that. That was not a prepared plug. Albert he set me up for that one, so I had to bring it home. Well, it sort of brings us to the end of today's episode. Albert, thank you so much for joining us today. I just really learned so much, and we'll link to the awesome report that you put out, because I think it provides really nicely, as I said it right at the beginning, just a beautifully structured way of thinking about the future of the function. And I think you've just done a great job of sort of, I suppose, condensing some of your thinking into some really nice infographics and thinking there. So I'll make sure that we share that, and because I got a lot of value out of it, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. So thank you so much for coming on, and thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you for the opportunity, Alex.